Wondering how your mindset affects your life? How to bring more energy into your business and life? Millions of people around the world ask these same questions daily. You are in the right place. Learn practices that will help give your life the meaning and success you've been searching for. Welcome to the Charge Podcast, teaching you how to create habits around real goals every day. Practical life advice from those who made it. Here's your host, Gary Wilbers.
Welcome, Chargers. We're glad to have you back again this week. Can you believe we are in the fourth quarter of 2021? So the key is really what I've tried to do with our guests this quarter is help you get prepared to have the success that you want to create in 2022. And I've tried to find different guests that bring those different viewpoints to really help you set up. What you've got to do from your end is really listen in and then decide what you want to take action on. And today, I think we've done it again of giving you a different viewpoint to really listen at. Today, our guest is Peter Docker. He is co-author of Find Your Why and formerly a founding igniter at Simon Sinek Inc. He is passionate about enabling people to unlock their natural talents. He believes leadership is about lifting people up and giving them the space they need so that when the time is right, they can take the lead. Drawing on his 25-year career in the Royal Air Force and over 14 years spent partnering with businesses around the world, Peter's goal is to inspire others to lead from the jump seat. Peter, it is great to have you on the Charge Podcast. Welcome.
Thanks, Gary. It's a delight to be here. Love it. Thank you.
Well, I can't wait to get in this conversation. But before we do, we kind of set up a little bit in the bio. But I love when guests share kind of their story of how you got from where you're at now to where it was, because it's not always a straight flight, as we all know.
Straight flights, and that word flight is quite pertinent, Gary, actually. I started my working career many years ago when I was aged around 20, when I joined the Royal Air Force as a pilot. And so I literally flew around the world. And from that early age, and I flew large aircraft that carried passengers, a little later on, air refueling aircraft that carried fuel. But during that time, I've visited 90 countries, I guess. I've been involved in, everything from various crises, humanitarian relief operations, to leading people in combat. I flew our Prime Minister. I was our Prime Minister's pilot for a while on our equivalent of Air Force One, although I have to say it wasn't quite as grand as your Air Force One. And learned a lot about people and about leadership during that time, the good and certainly the not so good. And as well as flying, I was very fortunate in that I did other things in the Royal Air Force. I was a negotiator for the UK government when the Berlin Wall came down. I've negotiated with your State Department on trade. I've been a teacher at the Defence Academy here in the UK, teaching leadership. So I've had a huge and varied career in the Air Force, and then subsequently in consulting and speaking around the world. And it's been a joy to meet so many people from so many different cultures, backgrounds. And I think more than anything, learn what brings us together as human beings. And that's the thing that delights me most, I find.
Yeah. And I think if we take the time, there's a lot more similarities than there are differences. And
I couldn't agree more.
Yeah. And I think we're going to get into that conversation, and really leadership is that person. And that's kind of your expertise. But let's start off with what do you think the difference is between a stand and a position, and why does it matter in leadership?
Sure. So I feel that, or find that, distinctions in language are really helpful because they enable us to have different conversations. And this is a great distinction, difference between a position and a stand. A position is against something. And we hear a lot of that in the world, in business, in politics, social media. It's when we take up a position against something. But the interesting thing is, for a position to exist, there needs to be a counter position. If there is no counter position, then our position just dissolves, right? Whereas a stand is for something. It's for what we believe. And it's so much more empowering because it doesn't have any dependence on anyone or anything else to exist. It's like we've got very narrow streets where I live here in England. And there's one not far from my home where only one car, it's wide enough for one car, but it's a two-way street. And so sometimes you get two cars meeting sort of head on and they stop. And occasionally what happens is the drivers take up a position against the other guy. And, you know, that would sound like, well, my journey is more important than yours. You were speeding, you must move out of the way. And as they take up their position, it becomes more entrenched and harder as it's a standoff and no one goes anywhere. But occasionally you get someone in one of those cars that immediately they meet the other, they reverse back up to the passing place because they live their life based on a stand. And in this case, it's a stand for being courteous on the road. And the interesting thing is, as soon as they reverse up, the other guy's position, it just dissolves because there's no counter position any longer. And what happens to the guy who has his stand? That's strengthened. It's deeply resolved. It has greater resolve to it. It's empowering and it's uplifting. So when I look at all the challenges we have in the world, when I look at the challenges we have as individuals in our life or what we're trying to achieve, it's much more generative and powerful when we choose to take a stand for something rather than a position against.
Wow, I tell you, there's a lot in there because where our country is, where our world is right now, you know, you're in the United Kingdom, but here in the States, you know, how many people are really just taking a position? And what is it creating? The challenges it's creating in our world. And I just love that philosophy of the stand. And then when you come down to individuals in the leadership, that becomes so important because do you want people working with you or for you?
Absolutely. And can I give an example, Gary? Because I think this is such an important and useful point and will help your listeners to get into action, I think. One of the toughest leadership challenges I have faced, I suspect you face as well, and that is being a parent.
Yes.
You know, there isn't a handbook. There's lots of books written, but when we bring our firstborn home for the first time, you know, we haven't really got a clue what we're doing, but we're absolutely committed to bringing our child up as best we can. Yeah, and it presents some big challenges, and so it was for me when our son Patrick turned 18. This is some years ago now. And it meant that under the law in England, he was now entitled to get a big engine motorcycle. Yeah. And my immediate reaction as a parent was, no way are you going to do that. Yeah. Because the streets around here, as I say, are narrow, they're twisty, and there are a lot of accidents. And so I could have taken up a position against him getting that bike. And that would have generated Patrick taking up a position against me because his stand was for freedom, for being able to go around and have his independence. So I looked at the position I was about to take and I flipped it around. I said, what's my underlying commitment? And that is for the safety of my family and well-being. So I thought, right, how can I turn this around? So instead of going to him and saying, no way you're going to get that motorbike that can do 130 miles an hour and hit 60 in 3.5 seconds. Instead of saying that, I said, you know what, Patrick, I'll help you get that bike. But there's one condition, and that is you do not only the minimum training, you do advanced training. We have a system over here to become an advanced rider. Okay. And what's more, I'm going to do that training with you. Okay? And of course, he thought it was pretty cool to become an advanced rider. So we started off with the training. We even got this beautiful Suzuki Bandit in bright yellow. We picked up secondhand, and it stayed in our shed whilst we were doing the training. But here's the thing, Gary. Halfway through the training, Patrick worked out for himself that by the time he'd paid for the insurance for this bike and the fuel, he wouldn't be able to afford to go anywhere. He said to me, you know what? I'm not going to go ahead with this motorcyclist said, I'm going to get a small car instead. But during that process, our relationship, what we accomplished together, accelerated way beyond what would have been if we'd taken up this position. So, I offer that because it's great coming up with these simple ideas, but it's how we apply them, which is so important. And that was where I took a position and flipped it and turned it into a stand.
Yeah. And I appreciate you sharing that, because I think it really sets in what we're talking about, and you can use it in any situation. In the workplace, how many times are you just taking a position?
Yeah.
Versus really taking that stand as leaders, as individuals, How many times do we watch something on the news or we take a position versus taking a stand? So I just love that you share that. It kind of really brought up a question that I thought of is, when or why is it important to shift really that context of the situation as we're looking at position or stand?
Well, great link actually, Gary, because, there are only two things in this world. This is as simple as it gets. There are only two things. There is content and there is context. Content, it's like all the jigsaw puzzle pieces on the table. Yeah. As a kid, or maybe now we still have jigsaws. Yeah. But it's only when we see the picture on the box that all those puzzle pieces make sense. The picture on the box is the context. It gives meaning to the puzzle pieces. And so it is in our life, in our work, in our relationships. We will have the content, the stuff that we do, the things that we're engaged in, the things that we say. But without the context, it has no meaning whatsoever. But here's the thing, we can choose. If we're not making progress in a particular area in our life, we can choose to shift the context, bring different meaning to what it is we're looking at. And that's exactly what I did actually with the example with my son and his motorcycle. Originally the context was, no way you're going to get that motorcycle because you're going to end up killing yourself. But I chose to shift that context to be guided instead by a stand. So sometimes if we're not making sense of things, it's handy to think about, well, how can I shift the context so as what I'm looking at takes on a different meaning, becomes more powerful, becomes more generative in the opportunities it offers up.
Wow. What a lesson in really communication, but it falls in leadership. And the one thing is, I'm sure, Peter, we have the same similar philosophies that first leadership comes from yourself. Just like what you had to do for yourself with your son, you had to first lead yourself to just not go and say, there's no way you're getting that motorcycle.
Yeah.
Instead, you paused, gave yourself that space, that time to be able to take that stand, to be able to really create that. But really in life, it's about that communication of how do we communicate it? And I love how you shared that with context and really content. How do we do that in each one of those? And it really makes me wonder in the workplace, and I think this works at home too, but how do we allow our team to choose the responsibility of being able to take that stand or really understand the context as we've been talking about?
I'll pick up on your responsibility aspect, because that I think is really key. But what I want to link around is, whenever we're talking about leading teams or organizations, it's really important for us to get clear on what it is that we believe. What is it that's really, really important to us? I'm not talking about, your latest pay rise or latest iPhone or whatever. No, what's really important to you? Give you an example. Family is important to most of us, yes. And about 18 months ago, I had a phone call from my wife sounding very shaken, and she'd had a traffic accident, and she wasn't far away. Now, nothing would have got in my way from going and helping her. And, I let people down in terms of conference calls I had or whatever, but everybody understood, because family tends to be a near universal thing that's really important to us. But when we can go deeper and beyond that to discover the other things that are really important to us, it allows us then to create a context where people in a team can join with us if they, find those things important too. Join with us in the stands that we have, what we believe is really important. And the reason that is so valuable is when we're faced with the unknown, people are then able and willing to step up and help us figure out the solution, whatever it is that's facing us. And that's where responsibility comes in, and this is another distinction in language. We can make people accountable for things, but only they can choose to take responsibility. And let me give you an example of how that works. You've got a family, and I always come back to family because it's a pretty common leadership challenge, but it can be applied in the biggest of businesses as well. But when our kids were young, they used to play out on the street with their friends, and it was a quiet neighborhood, so it was quite safe. But then perhaps every so often a car would come along or a stranger that we weren't familiar with, and we were accountable as parents for our kids. But when we went outside, we would also take care of and protect our neighbors' kids because we chose to take responsibility for their well-being too. Yeah. So in a team and organization where we can create an environment where people believe in what you're trying to achieve as the organization, they're clear on the context. They know how their own jigsaw puzzle piece fits into that big picture. It creates the environment then where they are likely to choose to step up and lead. And when that happens, you get so many added benefits for everybody, not least something called discretionary effort, where people are choosing to do more than is on any contract or whatever. They're choosing to contribute because they want to, not because they're told to.
Yeah, and that makes a big difference in several ways. And we've seen that over the last year and a half with the pandemic. Teams that had this built in, I guarantee you, they performed at a higher level than teams that did not, because what was the challenge? And we see that all the time because you're going to have a higher performing team when people know what their responsibility is. But the challenge is, of course, if they don't have that and they were sent home to work, the responsibility and the accountability side of it internally, they probably did what had to be done, and that's it.
That's right. And where this links to, Gary, is what I believe is any leader, we have a responsibility, or we can choose to have the responsibility for nurturing what I call an environment where people feel that they belong. Okay, because when people feel they belong to your team, to your organization, indeed to your family, then that creates the conditions where they can choose to step up and take responsibility. If they don't feel they belong, then why should they bother? So great organizations, and I've worked with one over here, ASOS. They are a global fashion clothing retailer. They have over 400,000 product lines and 4,000 people delivering to over 200 territories in the world. You can find them in America everywhere. And the average age of the employees is 27. But what Nick Bainton believes, he is the CEO of the company, he believes in giving people right down at the lowest level the opportunity to step up and lead. And he creates that condition where that happens by having everyone feel that they belong. And ASOS is all about empowering everyone to be who they choose to be, how they feel inside. And they happen to do it through the medium of fashion. That's their retail business. And that enables people to express who they want to be. But they apply that thinking inside their organization too. And so everyone in that organization feels that they have a part to play. They feel that they belong. And that's when the magic happens, because people choose to take responsibility, not just for doing the minimum, that subscribe to their job, but doing as much as they possibly can. And they're encouraged to do that. And it's a great environment.
And just think what happens. I'm sure profits wise is increased. Engagement is increased. They don't have as much trouble of keeping people because they feel like they're taking responsibility for their career, their kind of the roadmap that they're creating. That's where our organizations, I really think as leaders, we have to really look at. And if they haven't felt it over these last 18 to 20 months, something's wrong, because we've got to change as organizations and really bring the people side of it in. We know how important that is. And in the States, I don't know how it is there, but I mean, we're having trouble finding people for positions.
Yep.
Because a lot of people have chose to take themselves out of the workplace and become a solopreneur, or maybe they're doing gig work, whatever it is, but they've decided they're going to choose how they decide to move forward. Because why? What's been challenged with us as ourselves is we decided that we're going to take that opportunity while we have it. And the world is going to change. And business owners, as you're listening, you've got to change with that versus saying, this is frustrating. Can't get anybody to work. Instead, how is your organization working forward? And I think you bring up an interesting point in your book. You talk about humble confidence, and this may tie some of that together with that. What does that mean, and how do you kind of phrase that up with your book? I know that you have out, and we'll talk a little bit about that too.
Yeah. Well, humble confidence relates to, first of all, what is it that drives us? And things seem to come in twos, Gary. So, everything that we do that's important to us, everything is driven by one of two things. It's driven by either fear or by love. And as soon as I mention the love word in the business context, people can recoil a little bit. But, I speak from a place of leading people in combat, and I can tell you that love abounds. So this is what I mean. If we are driven by fear, typically we will see the world as a place of scarcity, of competition. It's where quite easily our ego starts to rise. And ego is Greek for I. It's all about me and not about other people. And when we're acting from fear, our ego can pitch up, or we can be underconfident and shying away from challenges. And that's a choice. Or we can choose to be driven by love in a situation. And when we're driven by love, then instead of ego, we'll have humble confidence, where we are willing to listen to others. We don't act as if we have all the answers. In fact, we use not knowing the answers as a positive strength and skill to lead. And when it's time for us to make a decision, then that is indeed what we do. So humble confidence is not about shirking decisions or being indecisive. It's about making a decision, but doing so whilst listening to other people. Yeah. But also, if we're driven by love, then we are thinking about other people too. We see possibility and opportunity in the world instead of scarcity. Yeah. So this is a choice, and we always have a choice, no matter how bad our situation. We can't now, but Nelson Mandela, when he was in prison for so many years, he chose love over fear. Malala Yousafzai, who was shot in the head because of her beliefs about education, she could have easily chosen fear, but no, she chose love. And the link between fear and love, Gary, is courage. Fear is the catalyst for courage, but courage can only be sustained through love. And again, I come back to an almost common denominator, being a parent. We are often fearful about the future, but we find the courage to do what we need to do for the love of our family. And so coming back to a business context, to have the humble confidence to lead in that way, to lead from a place of love and belief in what is possible and the opportunities that there are in the world, that encourages others in our team to step up and contribute. If we are leading instead from a place of fear and ego, then people tend to back off and let you get on with it and watch you as you fall. When you lead with humble confidence, then people will step up and help you overcome the challenges too. So it's a different way of thinking.
Yes. And it changes that paradigm. But as leaders, we have to be willing to adjust. And the world is changing. Communication is changing. Leadership is changing. But if we're willing to adjust, because I remember, early on, and Peter, you probably remember early on when you were a leader, you were not the same person you are today. And that's the whole key. If you're listening this, that's the whole key. What are you willing to change that paradigm that you have and lead differently? Because I would tell you, when I first was a boss, I was a jerk. It was do it my way or the highway, and that's how I led. But I started learning that I had to change. And at that time, I had a very small team. And of course, I thought I could control them all. Well, I got up to 150 employees. I didn't lead each one of them, but I led the team as the visionary. And if I would have stayed in that same position that I was with that small team, I would have been crushed, to be quite honest, because I would have took it all on my weight, all on my shoulders. Instead, you can really, by having that humble confidence, it becomes truly the team effort.
Oh, absolutely. And I'm with you, Gary. I have learned a lot. I continue to learn a lot about leadership. In my book, Leading from the Jumpseat, it covers all of the mistakes that I've made as well, what I've learned from them, and how I might do things differently, and how we can learn to lead with humble confidence, how we can learn to create an environment where people feel they belong and choose to take responsibility and step up with their own leadership. It is, life is a journey. And if we stop learning, then it's a sad day. So I'm still learning lots.
I'm the same way, but that's the reason we're willing to learn. And that becomes a key. Anyone that's listening, that's the key. Really, if you go into that with that mindset, it becomes an abundance mindset versus that scarcity.
Indeed.
Peter, I got to ask you one more question before we get to the recharge round and our time. Of course, when I get in these conversations, I love them, but I still want our audience. I know they're doing something active, either exercise or doing some sort of active activity. And I don't like to make them too long because they want to be able to finish them. But before I do, really, we've talked a lot about leadership. What does a leader really do, though? Or what should they do when they really don't know the answer?
Well, many people see not knowing the answer as a bit of a threat,
Right.
And that's by dint of our society. We go to school, we learn stuff, we become good at some things, we then make a career choice, we join a company, we become very good at what we do, and we get promoted because of that. And then all of a sudden we get to a level perhaps where we're no longer doing that job. We're actually looking after the people who do that job. And we can suddenly feel exposed because we don't have the answers. What I put forward is that if we can get comfortable leading when we don't know the answer, it opens up a whole new domain of possibility. Think about it. If we're leading a team or an organization, if we limit our progress based on what we know as an individual, we become the bottleneck in the course of progress of that team. If, however, we get really comfortable leading when we don't know the answer, and instead we focus on maintaining the context, as I mentioned earlier, having that be clear, the picture on the box where we're going, and also focused on holding the space where others can step up and contribute their expertise to figuring out the answer, that becomes a whole new dynamic ball game. And if anyone wants to have a quick look, there's an old film now, 1995 it was brought out, but still one of the best examples of how to lead when you don't know the answer. It's called Apollo 13. It's the story of the 1970 Apollo mission to the moon, and they had an explosion on the way there. And the story shows how Gene Kranz, who was the mission director at the time, at the age of 32, how he led through this situation where nobody knew the answer, and he created the environment, the context where his team could step up and figure it out.
Yeah, because when teams create that, boy, that creates that synergy. That creates where those teams explode. That becomes a high-performing teams.
Absolutely.
And makes a big difference. Peter, I truly appreciate you sharing that. Share with them again, you mentioned it, but how they could pick up a copy and the name of the book again. So if they want to get their copy, I'm sure.
So the book is called Leading from the Jumpseat: How to Create Extraordinary Opportunities by Handing Over Control. It's a how-to book, and it's available for pre-order now on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, and the equivalent around the world. It comes out between the 19th and 26th, depending on where you are in the world, 19th and 26th of October. And there are lots of stories in there from my flying days, but each story is linked to a specific way of leading and the specific point that I'm trying to get across. So I recommend it, obviously.
Well, Chargers, I would tell you, pick up a copy, because Peter has given us a lesson in not only leadership, but how we can move forward with ourselves. And he showed you with the examples, personally as well as professionally. So if you don't have that title as a leader in your organization, you're still going to really benefit from the book. So please pick it up, and we will have that all in show notes, making it easy for you. So if you are driving right now or exercising, so you can easily get that access that's available to you. Peter, before you go, we have 3 questions that we ask every guest, and we call it our recharge round. And in the recharge round, the first one is really the mantra of charge. That's my name of the podcast. Create habits around real goals every day. What habit do you think's led to success in your life?
I might be a little bit different, Gary, in that I see this, that the habits I have, it's more a case of who I'm being, how I approach things, which is I'm always willing to push myself. I'm always willing to go outside my comfort zone, to give it a go. And yes, I love mountain running and whatever, so I've got habits there. But when I think collectively of what keeps me moving forward, it's the willingness to give it a go and to learn. Yeah. That's what gets me out of bed each day.
And I love that one, because if we're willing, I loved how you said who I'm being, but the willingness to learn and then move forward with it. Yeah. The second one is a simple positive action. What's a simple positive action you take each day that helps you be more focused on creating the life that you want to create for yourself?
This links actually to creating a sense of belonging in team, family, whatever context you choose. And that is seeking out opportunities to show that I care. And that could be quite simply with family, or it could be with people I work with, other groups I belong to. It's seeking out opportunities to show that we care, because whenever we do that, we feed into the bank account that is belonging and nurture that sense of belonging. And that opens up all the possibilities that we've discussed during the last few minutes and more.
And so many simple ways to do it. One that I do is I don't do it every day, but throughout a week, I have 3 college-age children. I send them some sort of message. Sometimes it's with something that I read and I take a picture of it and I send that with them. Or sometimes it's just a message letting them know that I still care and that I'm kind of touching base with them. So many different ways. And you can do that with your employees, with your team members throughout. So what a great suggestion there. How about the last one? I'm sure you've had many life lessons, but what do you think the life lesson that you want to share with us, and what did you learn from it?
Well, there's quite a few actually, but I buck the trend and just give 2.
Sure.
One is mutual respect. We don't necessarily always see eye to eye with people, but something that's very strong and deeply rooted in me is the notion of mutual respect for one another, because I think that creates a foundation for so much possibility in the world. And the other thing that I would add on to that is the value in allowing things to happen. Certainly in the military, I was focused on causing things to happen, in terms of going into a war zone or humanitarian relief or whatever it is. As entrepreneurs, business leaders, we can be focused on causing things to happen. It's useful to pause every so often and think about allowing things to happen. And that's about creating a space where other people can step into that space. They can step towards you rather than you charging ahead. No offense with the charge side.
That's right. I used to be that. I talk about that.
It's a balance, create the space where people feel invited to be able to step into that space. And that's where extraordinary relationships can be built and possibilities can turn into reality.
Well, I'm interested. Did you say that because your charging mechanism, that was the challenge. That's what I was. I was a charger and I ran over people. But I realized that when we learn what charge is, you can still accomplish things. But when you do it with people and you become that mutual respect and you allow some of those things to happen, that really makes it happen. So love those life lessons. Thanks for sharing that, Peter. Peter, I know you're on Twitter, Instagram, at Peter Docker, Instagram, LinkedIn. So we will have all those links there, but share with them again, the book title that's out there. And we're going to really put that link in there so people can get a copy of your book.
Thanks, Gary. It's Leading from the Jumpseat: How to Create Extraordinary Opportunities by Handing Over Control.
I love the title and I love the subtitle of that. That sounds like an interesting read. I'll be getting my own copy there. So go to wherever you buy books, and if you listen to them, go ahead and pick up the Audible and really get yourself set up in that. And we'll have all the links available to you in chargepodcast.com. Peter, we can't thank you enough. What a great podcast. And I just thank you so much for saying yes to joining us today.
You're most welcome. It's been a delight talking with you, Gary. Thank you very much. And thank you for the work that you do too, lifting other people up.
Thank you. Chargers, I tell you, this is one of those podcasts. I'm sure you know someone that needs to listen to it. You've been hearing me tell you this, but on your podcast app, there's those 3 little dots. You can share this thing and just send a text message. So who do you know? 3 people. Will you do me a favor and share that? And I'll tell you what I'll do is if you go to feedback@goascend.biz, and we'll put the link in show notes also. If you send me an email, I'll send you a special little gift because I love sending something out to people and saying, thank you for sharing the message. So if you do that and you send us a message, now when you send me the message on feedback, give me your address because I'm going to mail you something very specific. And I think you'll enjoy it and you'll really like it. So please do that. Like and share the podcast, let others know about it, and come back next week for another great guest. Chargers, I look forward to seeing you next week. Make it a great day.
This podcast is ended, but your life doesn't just stop. To continue your inspiring journey, head over to chargepodcast.com and access all the tools and resources mentioned on today's show. If you enjoyed this episode, consider sharing with somebody who may also benefit from the advice provided. That's chargepodcast.com. Until next time, charge in business and life.